Hello and welcome back to Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights in this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest who is a chap I met this summer when he taught a class at Rutgers University that my son attended about screenwriting and filmmaking. Zack Morrison, a TV writer and a filmmaker, calling in from Los Angeles, New Jersey, born and bred. Got a Canada connection as well. How are you doing today, Zack?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to do this.
Oh, well, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks, Roland, and thanks for coming on, Zack. It's always interesting to hear about something a little different than what we usually talk about, which is often self-publishing novels and writing books and all that. And you're more of a screenwriting expert. You teach courses on it, a little summer camp kind of thing that you do. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how you got started with all that and where you're going with it, and then we'll go in from there.
Yeah. So I've been working in film and TV my whole life. Even when I was 9 years old, I started stealing my dad's camcorder on family vacations and started making like my own sketches in the backyard. And so I had a strong interest in filmmaking and storytelling since a really young age. I went to Rutgers in New Jersey for undergrad, where I studied both journalism and filmmaking. And then that's kind of where I first started writing my own stories, really. Combined with, I'm also a musician, so the storytelling in music and songwriting and the storytelling in comedy and screen were all things that were interesting to me. And then I went on to get my master's in my MFA in screenwriting from Columbia University in New York. That's kind of been my my journey this whole time. I moved out to LA in 2019 with my grad school thesis film. It was a short musical comedy called Everything's Fine, a panic attack in D major. It won the Student Emmy Award in 2019, and that kind of brought me out to LA and started getting me in the system out here. So I've always been interested just kind of in storytelling in general. And then the past 3 years, I've been fortunate enough to go back to Rutgers to teach summer classes. So it's been really great, like going back to my alma mater and working with local students in central New Jersey, and just seeing the way the film industry in New Jersey has been growing over the last couple of years. Especially with everything the governor's office is doing and the film commission bringing Netflix into the Army base, and it's a really exciting time for filmmaking back home. So I was always happy to teach those classes, and it's been a really fun experience.
So you'd mentioned you'd moved to LA, Rutgers, those back in New Jersey. So are you going back and forth? Is that how that works?
Yeah, bi-coastal is a phrase that I hear tossed around. It sounds gross when I say it out loud, but I moved out to LA because I'm trying to work in television and get staffed in writers' rooms. But just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. And New Jersey has a very fun way of doing that. So I still work a lot in New York and New Jersey. Plus all my family's there, and so there's always a lot of back and forth.
So you'd mentioned, moving there to get into writers' rooms, and you have your own sitcom that you're trying to pitch. So, I'm always interested in sort of how all that works. And I guess, is it basically, I don't know, impossible or just super hard or whatever to sort of try to sell a pilot if you're not living in LA? Like if you were in New Jersey, or I'm here in Canada and I have some idea, it's like, I got to move to LA to make it really happen. Is that how it works?
I think, and this is a relative question depending on who you ask, but I think 2020 showed us that anyone can really do anything from anywhere. Right. And I still firmly believe that. I think the reason I moved out here in the first place was one, when my when my short film, Everything's Fine, came, was nominated for the Emmy and ended up winning. Like, I just happened to be out here and started taking meetings, and I worked a lot in late night comedy in New York. I was at Saturday Night Live and the Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. They did a spin-off of Jimmy Fallon called The Kids Tonight Show, which we shot in 2021. There are jobs all over the place. But for me, just wanting to work in broadcast television, wanting to work in TV and comedy, I just kind of looked at just where the jobs are. And the majority of writing jobs are for television are in Los Angeles. Again, that's all changing. There's a lot of shows in New York, a lot of production that happens in Toronto and Vancouver and Atlanta and all over the place. So, it's the industry is going through a very interesting kind of change right now. But in general, most of the handshakingness is in LA, and the reason I moved out here was basically it's the numbers game, right? Like there's more chances to have more interactions with people that there's more opportunity for trying to develop a new project here than if I was doing it remotely from New Jersey. Now, that said, like you have to have a good script, which you can write anywhere. You have to have a good story, which you can write anywhere. And if anything, I find Los Angeles to be a depressing place in general. So, I don't know if I do my best creative work here, but I've sort of decided, at least for now, while I'm, before my hair goes totally gray, that I should at least try to play the game a little bit. But yeah, I mean, with Canusa Street, which is the TV pilot that I produced in 2022, we shot it in northern Minnesota. So we were nowhere near LA for production of it. But when I was in LA during 2020, during lockdown, the script was kind of my sort of fuck it pandemic projects. I need to do something to keep myself from losing my mind while we're stuck inside. So it was a year after I moved out to LA, the world shut down. So I had one good year and I thought everything was going to be great. And then everything went away. So I wrote Canusa Street while I was basically stuck inside in my apartment in Los Angeles because, we're just kind of following the news of what's going on with COVID and the border. And I read about there's this, town in Vermont called Derby, Vermont, or Stansted, Quebec. And it's one town that the border runs through. And during the pandemic, we closed the borders with Canada, but the town is wait, there's one gas station and it's on this side. And there's one grocery store and it's over here. What do we do? And so I just kind of became fascinated as a comedy writer with the schadenfreude of it all. I'm like, this is hilarious. So I just started going down a YouTube rabbit hole on this town and I just kind of fell in love with it. And so I was sort of chasing the story and kind of following the story there. And I thought it was just going to be a thing that I wrote that I threw on the shelf that I would use as a staffing sample for, staffing for other writers' rooms on other shows. But as the more with the pandemic went on and then the kind of the way things happened, I just started thinking of the possibility of actually producing it and making the thing, because especially in LA, and I'm sure this is the same for the for the novel writing world where everyone has a manuscript and getting someone to read something is very difficult. It is a very hard thing because everyone's got something they want someone else to read. And so my producing partner and I, we started spitballing, well, what could we do? What could we show people? Because we have this, we can make stuff in addition to writing stuff. So the conversation then became to the few places I sent the script to, it was hey, we love the script, but can you show us something? Can you give us a proof of concept, a visual component or whatever? And the longer that went on, the more it just kind of led ourselves to think, why don't we just make it? That way we can show it to people and you can watch it as opposed to, watch the 30-minute piece as opposed to reading the 30-minute piece and trying to imagine it. Because more and more executives in Hollywood don't want to imagine anything. They want it to just be this undeniable thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a journey trying to get this thing off the ground. But, to answer the original question, LA is kind of the place where these development conversations are happening. So depending on what route you want to explore, like I don't think you need to be here, but everyone is here. So it's kind of that numbers game, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because that's not how I thought that the process generally went, and I guess it's probably not. It sounds like you did things a little differently, but usually, you would have a pilot and you would try to sell it to a network or Netflix or whatever, and then they would, I think, usually do the pilot, right? But it sounds like you produced the pilot yourself. So is that that doesn't sound like the normal course to me, but maybe I'm wrong.
No. Earthquake.
Oh, what's going on there?
Oh, shit.
Wow. Earthquake during that.
This is fun.
Are you in LA right now? Because
I'm in LA right now. Holy shit.
That's a normal thing there, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's horrifying. Because we don't get those back east. So this is crazy.
It's still going?
I think we're good. The funniest part with that is it always feels like, oh, did a truck just drive by, or is the world on fire? You know?
Wow.
You just had a 4.7 2 miles from South Pasadena.
Holy balls. So it's every time this happens, I'm like, why the hell am I living here? Why am I doing this?
As long as it's not the big one, right?
Right. But sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
But no, you're right. Like that the traditional way of making a TV show is very much you write the script gets passed from your manager to an agent to a production company, and they buy the script and then they take it from you and run with it. But I think, and you saw a lot of the issues that are at play happened during the 2023 the writer's strike and the SAG strike, and that just the way that streaming has upended the traditional business models of television. No one's buying anything. Like it's just less and less things are being bought because all the streamers are spending $20 million an episode for every episode of every show. So just, no one's making these super affordable 3-wall sitcoms anymore. And as a result, no one's like really buying new ideas. So combined with the way the entire industry shut down in 2020, today now we're still feeling those effects from the pandemic 4 years later. So the reason we decided to do the things ourselves was that kind of like, fuck it, we'll do it live. Just East Coast DIY mentality that my producing partner and I have, both being from the East Coast, the New York City indie film area where we went to school. It's just people just make stuff. That's just kind of what you do back home. But also we realize, like, because knowing the way the industry has been contracting, knowing the way that it's harder and harder to get scripts in front of development people, what's something that we could do? Like, could we crash the party through the back door, essentially? And that was all kind of the thought process with Canusa Street.
I love that. It's when I went to see you present all the student films and stuff like that, you said a lot of interesting things, and my brain is always thinking, like, how can the lessons that we're learning about this different industry that's related to ours impact how authors and things work? And one of the things that really got me was exactly what we were talking about, Canusa Street, pitching it. You created the pilot. That Canusa Street has a really strong concept. And it's like, you can explain it. You can be in an elevator going someone, and it's like, hey, there's a town in Vermont where half of it's on Canadian soil and half of it's on American soil, and there are shenanigans that go on between. And that's an intriguing idea right off the bat. And I think that must really work in your favor to have such a strong concept when you're talking to people about it. And then I love the idea of you produced the pilot, and the pilot's almost like it's part Super Troopers, it's part The Office, and it's part Shoresy. You must be familiar with Shoresy, Craig, that hockey sitcom. You must know it, Zach.
I don't know that one, but we definitely went for like Super Troopers meets Brooklyn Nine-Nine meets like the small town minutia of Parks and Rec. Yeah, I wrote it very, very much for like kind of an NBC type of an audience, Yeah. But to your point, and thank you. I'm glad the premise works for you. But that's been the conversation of just in the process of trying to get this project around. Like, every time I've given someone the one-liner of, it's like you said, it's about It's about this town where the border runs through the town, and it's a real place. And so we follow the border patrol agents who have to deal with like the small town insanity of it being an internet, not only illegal, but like an international felony to walk across the street to your neighbor's house. That alone is hilarious to me. And then the hook of the show is the lead agent on the American side. Her twin sister is a Canadian Mountie doing border enforcement on the other side. And so like taking the premise and then finding the characters to fit into that premise. I mean, it's opened a lot of doors in terms of like, because it works in that one line and you can see what that show is right away. I found that we've been able to start having conversations of getting it in front of people. But also when you have a premise where, and we talk about this in TV writing all the time, like what's the story engine? Like what are the narrative mechanics that allow you to churn out story every week? When those things are solid, like you can, the story just writes itself. Like we have, you know, we can do 50, 60, 70 ideas just from this premise. And that's kind of that's how you know you have a good, you know, story premise is like you can just, you don't have to think hard to imagine the possibilities of where you can take it. And that's been the fun part for me, is just, you know, not only like the truth is stranger than fiction of it all, because there is a real town, there was a smuggling operation, there is a library in this town that straddles the border, that it was gun smuggling, it wasn't salmon smuggling that we have in the pilot, because salmon is way more funnier than guns. But we heavily borrowed a lot from Derby Line, Vermont as just a place. But, you know, combined with the fact that we have our two leads, our twin sisters, and they're actual identical twins that are friends of ours in Los Angeles.
So it's not the same actress?
No. So we actually, it's Lauren and Sierra Tothero, two incredibly talented and funny twin sisters who are comedians in LA. And so, you know, we're also trying to show, you know, Hollywood people that you don't need to spend $10 billion to clone someone's face. Just get two actors that look the same. And we're a more affordable television show.
I was really impressed with that. I was like, wow, he's good with the old Adobe After Effects being able to do this. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's so good that Adobe just created an entire second person for us, you know.
Yeah, that's, I'm sure, way more affordable. I was going to ask about that in the sense that if you're filming your own pilot and you don't have like a studio behind you already, you have to fund it yourself, and you have to do that whole the entire process of doing all that, which is not necessarily something that somebody who's just a screenwriter who wrote a pilot would have any clue on what to do. So how did you figure all that out and navigate that process?
Yeah, I mean, you know, how do we make the film is always the conversation, you know, that I think most writers run into. And this is where having like an actual filmmaking background and having a production background, I'm very glad that I was able to have that experience. And also I feel fortunate that I was able to learn how to actually make stuff, you know, just being a filmmaker. But I've always viewed writing and directing as two halves of the same job. So like every script that I write, I'm always thinking about, is this something I would direct? Is this a producible thing? Because I'm definitely first and foremost, a filmmaker, and I kind of fell backwards into writing out of just necessity, because like I can't direct anything if there's no script and no one's just throwing scripts at me. So I should learn how to write, and that's kind of how I've always looked at just the storytelling. Like we're working a visual medium, and the script is just the blueprint. But but I mean, my producing partner, Carver Dizerins, we were classmates at Columbia. He was a producing student, I was a writing directing student, and we kind of hit it off. And so, you know, but a project this size, you have to do a lot of short films in order to learn how, you know, building a film works. And so I did 12, 20, like just a bunch of short films in high school and in college and in grad school. And, you know, this was definitely the biggest project I've ever made by a factor of 30, because our budget was like 300,000. And my last short film, Everything's Fine, that musical project, was only 10,000. So much, much larger scale. And I definitely called in all the fundraising favors I would have called in for a first feature. But also like this was a script I believed in, and in 2021 the script was starting to get some industry buzz, and we were winning festivals, and that kind of got the attention of the guy who became our first investor, and it was sort of just the script began to take on a life of its own. And I realized, even though this isn't how television traditionally gets made, it was so much like this, the train was already leaving the station, that I couldn't say no to the opportunity. So it really just became like saying yes and to the universe, and saying, oh, I guess we're making this now, because this is now, the script is taking on a life of its own. So it was really, really cool. Just sitting back being like, oh, I guess this is happening. Like, I don't have a choice here. And then when we started getting in touch with the people in Minnesota, they kind of explained to us that, because there's a big rebate system in Minnesota where they're throwing money at productions right now. And we were getting in right at the end of the first wave of that, where there was essentially one slot left. And so it was like a 2-month period between October of 2021 and like December of 2021, where we went from, this is just a script and this will only be a script, to, oh, we're making this in April of next year, we have to move. Wow. Like they really just took the decision making process away from us, because again, it was one of those things we couldn't say no to it. So it really was a matter of jumping off the cliff and learning how to fly on the way down for putting this thing together. But all of the preparation that we did in years past of making short films and being indie filmmakers, and school was great, but combining school with the practical knowledge we got from making stuff a lot, those two things kind of came together, and everything worked out great.
There was something you said in the presentation that really stuck with me. You were saying there's no such thing as an aspiring filmmaker, because you're either a filmmaker and you're making films, or you're not. And it reminds me of one of my favorite Oscar Wilde quotes. He said, we are we are verbs, not nouns. So if you're a writer, it's because you're writing. But I like that. And it's like your background and all of the stuff you've done. You've constantly been making short films, and then this. But it looked brilliant, and it looked so professional, I guess, because you had all that practical experience beforehand.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's the Yoda, do or do not, there is no try. In the class with Martin, where I was giving that talk, I mean, I was referencing, Seth Meyers told me that. Like, when I was an intern at Late Night with Seth Meyers, which was my first job in television. Well, I mean, my first job in comedy. I worked a couple gigs in TV before that, but I was the writer's intern. I was getting the writer's coffee every day. I was also sitting at my desk. Like, this was 2016, so there is a lot. There's a lot going on. And so
that was like seamless Trump impression there.
Thank you. So I was like researching the news of the day every day and feeding the news stories to the writers, and it was a really, really cool job. But I got to, I was the first one in the office every day, and Seth was always the second one in the office. So super, really, really nice guy. Really sets the tone for how well that show is run, and I learned a lot from him. But specifically, towards the end, because you get to just talking with people, and I just said, hey, I'm an aspiring writer. How do I do this? Blah blah blah. And I kind of gave that ask to him, and he basically said that. He's like, stop. There's no such thing as an aspiring writer. Are you writing? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, then you're a writer. Then you're already undercutting yourself when you're saying you're an aspiring writer, because that implies you're not doing the work and you want to be. And I don't know what it is with, the imposter syndrome that artists face, but we never give ourselves permission to feel like we do the thing that we do, and I don't know if you guys experience this, but at what point do you find the confidence to start calling yourself a writer as opposed to someone who writes? And it's very strange, and it's taken me years to deprogram that imposter syndrome, and I still struggle with it every day. But I think part of what I think changed for me with Canusa Street is, this is the first time I felt like I have a real non-student project, like having that like student filmmaker adjective, quantifier to it really kind of changes things. And so being able to have something that I've done outside of school on my own in a professional environment, that that's helped me find confidence in myself as a storyteller, because now I can show people this thing, and I know it's good, and I know it's the best thing I've ever done myself. So it's allowed me, I feel, to level up as an artist, and find that confidence now to know, oh, these are the types of stories I'm interested in. This is what my voice is as a comedian and as a storyteller. And it was really a process of discovery, if that makes sense.
Didn't you say you won an Emmy though? Wouldn't that have given you that confidence as well?
You think, but imposter syndrome.
And then those were the student Emmys, so it still had that student, and it was my graduate school like master's thesis film, so it wasn't like an undergraduate university student, but still, like, there was something about, even now, like when I tell people around town, oh yeah, the student Emmys, they're like, the what? That's a thing. So it's, being able to have something that you do outside of school, that first like big thing, always feels nice. And it's nice to have, because I mean, a lot of, especially with film, because it's not like writing a novel where just the typing of it is the final medium that it lives in, because of all the money it takes to produce stuff. So it's a miracle anything gets made ever. So the fact that I'm able to have done the thing outside of a school environment, that's a blessing in and of itself. But it's definitely helped, just from the navigating the business side of things, it's helped me advance in that regard too.
So, earlier I mentioned, like, one of the things that I heard from you that I thought applies directly to when you're writing novels and things like that is having a really strong concept. The other thing you just touched on, which I think is really important, is you were saying if you have characters, they interact together and they almost like write the stories for themselves. And I've definitely found that, Craig, you probably have, where you have strong characters and then you find like, oh, this character here and this character here, if they're placed in that situation, I have to write a novel about it now. I'm kind of obligated to. And you've got really strong characters in Canusa Street. You mentioned you had a background in improv comedy as well. And I was just wondering how much that comes into, and also how much that kind of like colors the comedy that you have, which kind of, it was a funny, like, the whole thing is funny and it's witty and it's clever stuff throughout, but it's not forced.
Thank you. I think as far as like the process of doing it, and I think most people that find themselves going into comedy, it's in some way, shape, or form, either dabble with or get experience in improv. It's just kind of one of those core elements of the craft that I think any strong writer should have a background in. But I mean, when we had a script, I don't believe when filmmakers are like, oh, we're just going to improv. There's no script. We're just going to improv the movie. I'm like, you're just doing a bad job, right? That, you're basically making your actors do the work for you. But I love when actors improv on set. I'm always like looking for new jokes and, hey, let's do something else. Let's try this. Parts of Canusa Street that made it into the final cut were either improvs on the day, like improvised lines, like in the first scene we shot in the whole pilot day, first setup on day one, we just met the twin sister, the Canadian, and they're walking to the outside of the library, and it's the scene of the crime, and the library is right on the border, and there's a white line going right through the front of the building. On the page, the scene opens with one of the American sisters saying, "I hate this building," and the Canadian sister saying, "Oh no, come on, you used to love here coming as a kid." But then that's how the scene opened on paper. And then when we shot it, the actor who plays Rick, who's he's the American Border Patrol, he's like the dumb sidekick. He gets transferred up from El Paso, and so his experience is all on the southern border, which is our way to play with to have commentary about certain things there. But that actor, Jay Rincon, who's just brilliant, he just improvised the line after I called action, and he was like, "Man, so this is what a library looks like." And we were we were dying. We were all cracking up. The take was ruined because we were laughing. I go up to him and I'm just like, "What the hell was that? That was amazing." And he's like, "Yeah, I really think this guy thinks he's Clint Eastwood and is not." And I'm like, that's brilliant. So, and then that one like improvised line colored the character's performance for the whole pilot. Like, you know, on paper, he was a very dull, you know, the only description I gave him was he's a tall, dark, stupidly handsome, stupidly stupid. That's how the character is described. But like his dialogue was very bland. There was really nothing to it. I was actually struggling to figure out a voice for this character because he was filling a spot on the checklist. Like the character had a role in the story, but his role was to be there, you know, so I didn't really know who this guy was. And then, I mean, that's the beauty of filmmaking when you have an actor who brings their own ideas and their own experience combined with your words on the page, and then something magic happens there. And we discovered who this guy was right in that moment on the first day. So at that point, Rick as the character kind of became one of my favorite ones to play with anytime he was in a scene, because just he could say anything. Yeah, and that was the fun part. And then later on, you know, throughout the production, there's another scene where they're knocking on door to doors and doing the "Have you seen this man?" kind of trope from cop shows. And because they're looking for a salmon smuggler, and smugglers are sometimes called a mule, that Rick, our resident idiot, thinks, oh, wait, man, it's a salmon mule. That's got to be a half salmon, half mule mythological creature. And so he pulls up like a drawing of like, hey, and have you seen this guy? And it's like a drawing of a half fish, half horse thing. And it's a fun sight gag, but like that came from all the different inside jokes that we had over the course of producing the first half of the episode. And then at lunch every day was just a writer's room. We were just all pitching ideas. Everyone, like, again, when you see the premise working so much that everyone is having different ideas that are working, you know, it's not like we're problem solving an idea and we need like new ideas to fix this issue. It's everyone's having good ideas because the core story mechanic is working very, very well, and it's just fueling imagination. And so that's, you know, sketch kind of visual sight gag that comes halfway through the pilot. We came up with that at lunch 2 hours before we shot it. And then we just wrote that into the script and we printed the props out and then we filmed it. So, I mean, a lot of the way I like to work is saying yes and to the ideas the actors have, saying yes and to the ideas my producers, and we had a PA who pitched a joke that made it in the cut because it was a funny joke and it was funnier than our ideas, so we shot it. So that, not necessarily using improv to generate the script, but having like a familiarity with improv and the tools of improv to create a collaborative environment, and like a supportive collaborative environment, I think is super important for a filmmaker, whether you're doing comedy or not. Because even if you're doing drama or horror or serious stuff in the content matter, having that improv awareness to not be like to know that your script this is just a blueprint. This is not, you know, we're not publishing Shakespeare with this screenplay. So let's if it's a bad idea, throw it out. If someone has a better idea that like allows us to move forward, let's go with that, you know? So that's kind of the way I like to make films. I know there are a lot of writers out there who think their word is God and you don't touch my script, and it must suck working for those guys. So that's not how I want to do things.
I've heard stories about that as well. I think that's almost like an ego thing, right? It's like, I've written something and that is what will be produced. You know, it's like, I don't care if you have a better idea. It's not better because it didn't come from me.
Yeah, and then what happens when your brilliant idea on the page leads to hours of delays because we can't, you know, you get to the space and you realize we can't physically do this, then it becomes, you know, because someone's got to be the captain of the ship, right? So then you as the director can either tank production or change your idea so we can move forward. And that's a choice that has to happen, and 99 times out of 100, the smart choice is change the script.
That's so interesting. And I guess that's where it is very different to like writing novels, because writing novels, you lock yourself in a room and you're doing that, whereas you were in a much more collaborative environment. But I think that is a positive thing, isn't it? You've got different inputs from other people, and diversity of opinions and experiences naturally like create something richer. Like I look at Rick and I think of him as like the Andy of the show, if you think of Parks and Rec.
Yeah. And it's fun. It's funny how that just through the process how those things emerge. And then on the flip side, like I said, someone has to be the captain of the ship, so it's not a democracy. And I think that's the other assumption or false assumption that people make is like, oh, well, because it's a collaborative environment, ergo this really is a democracy, and we have to, everyone's voice needs to be heard. And that's where the more films you make, the more you gain that experience of navigating where on that scale each and every decision is going to be, right? So you try to receive input from other people. You should receive the input, and then it's up to you to sort of like decide which pieces make it through and which pieces you pass on. And so being able to make choices under pressure, which again comes from having the improv background of knowing that you need to make a choice in order to advance the scene. That to me is also a skill that takes time to build up, and you only get that from making. The more work you make, the more those skills strengthen.
One of the other things that you mentioned that I found was really interesting, you said that when you make a film, it's almost written 3 times. You got the script, then you actually film it, and then you have to make decisions on the fly while you're filming things, and then you edit it, and you can make edits there. With writing, I guess it's you plot your story out, you write your story, the first draft, and it goes in certain directions, then you edit it. The first draft is you telling yourself the story, as Neil Gaiman said. So I just found that quite interesting. And in terms of, like, just as an example, at Canusa Street, how far did it go? Did it differ from the script to the shooting to the actual editing? How different did it end up going?
I think Canusa Street, probably as an outlier to that scenario, is very true to what the script was. I mean, I think some of the dialogue in the scenes definitely changed because, like for example, with the that "have you seen this man" bit, like there were some parts that we kind of wrote on the day. There were other things that we were trying to do that were sort of TV showy. Like we introduced some new characters at the end of the pilot in the original draft that I assumed when it was on the page as a writing sample. The goal was to just show that I can write, and to tease episode 2 and that kind of stuff. But when we started to get into the logistics of production, we had to make some of those edits because it just either wasn't practical. We couldn't find an actor like, that like face, that new face at the end of the episode trope would be reserved for someone who would be a series regular. And we didn't have any of that really ready. So we decided to just cut the character. So that way, as a thing that you would watch, it would end nicely. So there were some things like that. But as far as like the kind of main, if you like kind of zoom out and think of the main spine of the story, your sort of beginning, middle, end structure, most of it was pretty much there. And granted, that came from the process of writing multiple drafts before we went to shoot it. Which is something I work with my students a lot of, like, once you write the script, there's this like feeling of, oh, it's a first draft, it's ready to go, let's shoot it. And that's in the same way that you would never publish the first draft of your novel, part of the process is the necessity of rewriting, because you have to vomit it out, you have to get it on the page, and then you got to go like take a breather and come back a couple days later, and then your perspective on it is going to change, right? You're going to realize, oh, right, I this isn't working, and we have to figure out how to make this work better. And so part of the benefit of being trapped inside for an entire year was that I had nothing to do but just sit and think, and just be revising. And I think I wrote 4 or 5 different drafts of the script before I started submitting it to festivals. And then once we started fundraising and preparing to make the thing, I continued rewriting, because then I had to make the thing producible within our budget constraints. And then factored in all the changes we were making on the fly as we were filming it. So it was constantly an evolving document. And then when you get to the edit bay, there's choices that you make there were some beats that we discovered in the edit that weren't on the page. Little things like just a character glances from one person to another. Something I talk about in my intro to filmmaking class that we did at Rutgers this summer was a lot of first-time filmmakers forget they don't shoot like a shot of a character listening to dialogue. You know, a lot of times they only shoot what the character's speaking, and then we just cut back and forth between the different characters speaking. But depending on the scene, depending on the context of what we're doing, sometimes it's really important to have a shot of a character listening and thinking and reacting to what they're hearing, because that's how we as the audience identify with that character, and we can track their decision-making process down the road. And so we found a couple beats that weren't on the page in Canusa Street, and we constructed them in post that I think added a little bit of nuance to some of the scenes, because we got to see some characters thinking or, you know, reacting in a way that added an extra joke to the scene, because the reaction itself was funny, even if what we filmed, the intent of what we filmed wasn't for that reaction to be funny. So, you know, through the edit, like the editing is the third writing step, because you really are writing the film again when you're editing it together.
That's really interesting. Back when I did theatre, they always used to say that you're not acting, you're reacting. That's where the real magic happens.
Now that it's done in terms of the pilot and you filmed it, and this is, again, from my understanding, very different than how it normally go, right? You would write the pilot, you would, let's say, approach, you'd give it to your agent would approach, various NBC, ABC, Netflix, Apple, whatever, and try to sell it, right? And then they would typically do the pilot. So how does that differ now that you have the pilot? Is it, I don't know, easier, harder to try to make that sale because you have the pilot, and now it's like, I wonder in the minds of the people watching it, it's like now it's this fixed thing versus this nebulous, I can do what I want with it thing. I mean, you could always, they might love the idea and maybe didn't want the pilot as you filmed it and say, okay, we'll buy it and we'll redo the pilot. But I'm just wondering about that process, and how far you are in it. Maybe you don't know, but
yes, I mean, that's kind of where we're currently at, because so we shot it in 2022 and we were getting ready to start shopping it around in the beginning of 2023. And then beginning of 2023, the industry shut down for the strikes. And so we lost essentially all of 2023 in terms of potential productivity, because the strike started in, what was it, April or May, but in the run up to that, everyone knew it was coming. So, the industry was already shutting down in advance of the strikes. And I think now, a year later, we're just beginning to see the signs of life returning, because even after the strike ended in October, November, the industry continued its regularly scheduled programming of already contracting. So, it's like that kind of ball toy that like expands and contracts. And we're just starting to see things open back up again. Now that all of the studios are realizing they went all in on streaming and it's a terrible business model. And so we're just starting to see like television shows returning with 18 episode, 20 episode seasons. That's just starting to come back, which means the wheels are beginning to spin. Oh, right. We can't be spending Game of Thrones level dollars on television anymore, because 30 years ago, we didn't have to. We could make cheap shows that could keep going. So we're just starting to get to the point where we're able to potentially start trying to shop the show around again. But the way we're doing it, I mean, we're kind of taking a two-pronged approach here. On the one hand, we have the script, and I have a sizzle reel cut from the pilot. So we have that visual sample, that proof of concept, and we're trying to take that around and do kind of the traditional process with it. But now you have a lot of, you kind of have these celebrity filmmakers like Mark Duplass going on a press tour talking about independent television with Tubi and Roku and all of these channels needing new content. The industry is finally starting to come around to something it discovered in the wake of the 07-08 writer strike, where that we have these filmmakers and these writers making their web series. And, from like 2009 to whenever House of Cards really took off in like 2013, 2014, you had web series being Broad City, High Maintenance, Issa Rae's Insecure, which was Awkward Black Girl. Like, you had all of these even It's Always Sunny started as like an independent pilot. So the industry is just starting to realize, oh wait, we had this new talent cultivation system years ago. Why don't we start doing that now again? So we're trying to sell the show kind of traditionally, but also if if we can find the means to do the whole season 1 independently, then we can walk straight into the door at any of these streamers and like say, here's the show, it's tied up in a little bow, it's done. There's no risk, because everyone is so risk averse right now, and that's the reason shows aren't being made. If you guys watch Hot Ones, the
yes, but
Buffalo show, yeah, Vince Vaughn just a couple, either the most recent episode or 2 ago, Vince Vaughn basically talked about this, and he's like, the reason why we're in this phase of everything being IP driven and being franchise sequels and reboots and all this stuff is because the executives, from Vince Vaughn's perspective, the executives everyone's afraid of losing their jobs. And so if you can deliver something with a built-in audience, you don't have to take a risk on a new idea. So everyone's extremely risk averse right now. And that's why you're not seeing new shows, but you are seeing a lot of British cop shows and Scottish and Irish shows popping up on our streamers now, and Canadian shows. Like the acquisitions teams are at full blast because they need material, and their in-house system isn't making any new stuff, so they're going out acquiring stuff that's already out there. So our hope with Canusa Street, if we can't like find a buyer to develop the show with, internally, we might try to make the whole thing and then sell the finished product back to one of the platforms. So we're kind of playing it by ear, and again, it's that saying yes and to what the universe throws at us, that's going to sort of guide us in one direction or another.
Yeah, that's interesting. The publishing industry as a whole has changed a lot. Where it used to be, you would write a manuscript, you'd find an agent, the agent would approach all the publishers and stuff. And now so many people they self-publish, they reach a certain level of success with it, and then the publishers come knocking at the doors, because the publishers don't want to take a risk either, and they want somebody who's good enough to be making good money, but not quite so good that they wouldn't be able to make more money if they had a publisher behind them.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing now because like everyone's, the new sort of trend in TV development right now is packaging. Like studios it's not just enough to have a good script anymore. You need talent attachments. You need a package of all of, so that way you can present this undeniable success potential before they even want the project. And we're hearing stories of A-list projects with A-list attachments getting passed on because like just no one from the top all the way to the bottom is having any luck selling new stuff right now, which is leading people like Mark Duplass to sort of be the flag bearer for what the kind of thing we're doing with Canusa Street, of saying, hey, well, we don't want to wait for your permission anymore. We're going to go make the thing because we can, because the technology has reached a point where everyone has, like everyone's got a camera in their pocket. So like worst case, we can just shoot the crap version of it. And then because it's easier to get eyeballs on it once it's out there, as opposed to another script in the pile of 50 scripts that are sitting on, development executives' desks.
The slush pile.
Yeah.
We're approaching the top of the hour. But this is almost like a really great place to wrap it up. I mean, you just gave a great lesson, I think, to every author out there, not aspiring author, every author out there, that, now is the time, write, create, do your stuff. As we go, where can people find out more about you, more about the projects you've done, more about Canusa Street, stuff like that? We'll pop a link down below, but tell them right now.
Yeah, so I'm very active on Twitter and Instagram at Zack Morrison 18. That's kind of the current place where I'm just kind of talking and spewing funny stuff. But you can also find out more about Canusa Street and Everything's Fine, A Panic Attack in D Major, and all my other work at zackmorrison.com. And Canusa Street isn't out there yet, but we just wrapped up a national film festival tour. We potentially are going to have more dates on the calendar soon, so we're hoping to take our show on the road and maybe bring it to a city near you.
Fantastic. Well, Craig, before we wrap up, do you have any final questions?
I mean, this has been fascinating. I love hearing about sort of the background of how things get created, the industry insider sort of, stories, the rumors, the tips that you have just by being in the heart of everything and working there. So to me, this sort of thing is fascinating, and I love the idea of, the way that you sort of find your own path to success. You're like, okay, well, this traditional way of selling a script isn't working for me right now because of all these other macro reasons that are outside of my control. So I just go and film it myself and sell it off. Like, that's awesome. And I think that that's one of the things that, we really always try to tell authors is think outside the box a bit. If self-publishers specifically, you're always your own everything, right? And so you can't just rely on the traditional mode. The traditional mode stopped working. That's why we all went to self-publishing. So I think that what you're doing is working, and it's a great idea, and it's been a fascinating discussion. So thanks for coming on.
Yes, thanks, Craig. Really appreciate it. To quote one of my favorite movies, and a movie I know Roland really loves, you have to follow your feet and change your stars. So.
Nice to know.
Yeah, it's the make your own luck thing that if you can take away one thing from all of this, it's you really just got to you have to just write your script. You have to write your story and do the work yourself.
Oh, well, that is brilliant advice. Zack, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I think this has been a fascinating discussion. We will, of course, pop a link down to zackmorrison.com down below in the description. In fact, why don't you start scrolling down there? Because you'll find that link. You can follow it, click through, find his stuff, but you will pass that huge comment section. So while you're there, why don't you leave Zack a comment and let him know how much you appreciated everything that he had to share with us today. While you're down there as well, there's the like button. You could give that a double tap. There's the subscribe button if you haven't already. And there is even that bell icon. If you click on that every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked, you will get notified, and you will get notified next week when we're back with a brand new episode. So thanks very much, Zack, and we'll be back next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Cheerio.